have joined the webinar Teach Climate Science with Sea Change, Bounty, Peril, and Survival in the Gulf of Maine. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. My name's Denise Olson. I'm Director of Education Marketing at GBH. GBH is Massachusetts Boston's flagship station in the PBS network. As most of you may know, PBS is made up of stations from across the country, and we at GBH are one of the main contributors of content to PBS, including some of the shows that you know and love, like Nova, Masterpiece, American Experience, many kids shows. And we're also a major contributor of content to PBS LearningMedia. So PBS LearningMedia is a partnership between PBS and GBH. It is PBS's free pre-K through 12 digital learning resource, goes across disciplines with an emphasis on social studies and science, and it is where we publish our free digital learning resources for teachers in classrooms. And you'll see here the number of visitors and page views that we had in the 23-24 school year. If you haven't been to PBS LearningMedia in a long time, or you're not familiar with it, I'd encourage you to go take a look and see what we have. Next slide, please. So tonight's webinar features a recent NOVA presentation, Sea Change, which is 3 films about the effects of climate on the Gulf of Maine, the challenges, biodiversity, and adaptation. And I'd like to give a special shout out to our attendees from Maine tonight. Maine are here, Biddeford. And we'll be talking about the beautiful natural resource in the state, the Gulf of Maine. And during this webinar, we'll highlight some of the stories featured in the films and also give you insights into an important research topic. We'll connect these stories to climate and other coastal ecosystems and then walk you through some of the classroom resources we've developed. So I'd like to introduce our presenters for tonight. First, Sean Stevens is the Director of STEM Curriculum and Instruction at GBH. Prior to joining GBH, she spent several years doing educational research focused on student and teacher learning and developed instructional materials for both formal and informal settings. She was part of the team that defined the core ideas and progressions for physical science, for a framework for K through 12 science education, which was the foundation for the next generation science standards. Cara Pekarcik is a biology and zoology teacher at North Quincy High School in Massachusetts and a former whale biologist. Cara was the 2018 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year and has received numerous science education awards. Cara's doctoral dissertation investigated teachers' perceptions and instructional practices related to career exploration in high school STEM curricula. Cara has worked with GBH since 2018 as an educator ambassador and as part of the PBS Digital Innovator All-Star Program. And our special guest tonight was featured in the Sea Change films. Dr. Doug Rasher is a senior research scientist at Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Science in East Boothbay, Maine. His research is focused on revealing the causes and consequences of abrupt state shifts in coastal ecosystems. Today, he'll be speaking about his current research in kelp forests in the Gulf of Maine. So I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Sean.
Okay. Thanks, Denise. And thank you to all of you for coming and spending the evening with us. I'm going to just give you a really quick introduction to Sea Change, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Rasher, who will talk a little about his research and what he's seen in the Gulf of Maine. Then Cara and I are going to talk about the resources that we've developed from the sea change films that you can use in your, and how you might be able to use them in your classroom. Have a little quick preview of a new novel collection on PBS LearningMedia, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for everyone. But feel free to put your questions in the chat, and if possible, we might address them as we go. Otherwise, we can also chat more at that particular time. Next slide, please. So Sea Change was a three-part film that aired this past summer on PBS. And it's the story of the Gulf of Maine, which is one of the most it's a unique and bountiful body of water. The different parts focused on just the different aspects of its unique history since we've been following it. Its bounty really kind of drove the trade and the development of colonies in the early US. Human activity has put it in peril. It is changes from climate change have are leading to significant differences in the ecosystem throughout the Gulf. And then the third episode focuses on people, scientists, individuals, businesses, communities, indigenous communities, and how they are all working to build resilience to the changes in this setting. So the next slide, please. And we're just going to play a short video to give you an introduction, just to give you an idea of the film.
The Gulf of Maine is a canary in the coal mine, a sea within a sea, warming faster than 97% of the global ocean. What happens here will likely happen everywhere.
So many of the places I used to go just don't have what they used to have.
What is the way forward, and what does the future hold?
Change is not hard. What's hard is sticking with the status quo.
On Nova.
Cara and I are going to talk a little about some of the resources that we made from excerpts of these films and potential ways that you could use them in your classroom. Next slide, please. The first resource I'm going to tell you about is about like what forms the Gulf of Maine, what makes it so special. And that actually turns out to be the currents. And so there's the current from the Labrador current from the Arctic coming down. So it's carrying really cold oxygenated water, and the geography of around like Nova Scotia kind of brings that cold water into the Gulf of Maine and sets up a unique ecosystem there. And what's changing now, or kind of recently, is the Gulf Stream, which is bringing warm water up from the south, has been moving towards the coast, and the Labrador current has been getting weaker and moving east. So more warm water is getting into the Gulf of Maine and causing the warming is just that's why it's going so rapidly. Next slide, please. So this is a very specific phenomenon, but it could be used to drive a lot of different investigations. Of course, it ties to impacts of climate change, but even other things that you would cover in earth science, things about like the factors that drive ocean currents, the ways earth systems interact, and even you can see here is a different resource, but the ocean's role in redistributing energy around the planet. So that brings that up a little bit. We have this resource here from a different collection, Bringing the Universe to America's Classrooms, that overlays a simulation of, it actually moves, but this is just a still from it. of ocean currents, global ocean currents overlaid with surface temperature. So students can actually see how the water is moving and going into the Gulf of Maine, but also how energy is moving around the globe. Next slide, please. In that same collection, Bringing the Universe to America's Classrooms, we have another resource that gives these maps of sea surface temperature, salinity, and density. And students can use those to start making models of what drives the ocean currents, the big global ocean circulation. And then you can tie it to this change in the flow in the Labrador current and in the Gulf of Maine to give something specific instead of this general global circulation. There's a change and there's a reason why we need to, and they can go through and use these maps also to predict how changes in salinity, density, and temperature are going to affect the motion of these currents. Next slide, please.
So one of the things that we want to talk about as well are some resources that you can use with your students to help them maybe figure out. This is the way we're approaching science education now, is allowing students to figure out what's going on, look at this phenomenon, and maybe identify for themselves what they're seeing. And this resource, the Gulf of Maine Daily Sea Surface Temperature, which is offered by the Maine Climate Office, allows students to actually find specific data, or you can find the data for them to provide it. But they see the change in the sea surface temperatures. They can also see that image. So every time you click on a particular date or year, the image and the colors change so that they can see the temperature changes, similar to what Sean was talking about in some of the previous examples. But this is more of a way that you can pick out specific data points and actually analyze those as well. Next slide, please. And by the way, links to all of these resources that we're talking about, you'll receive them on a resource document, so you don't have to go searching for them on your own. There are some other resources available that refer to unique ecosystems. As we just heard, that amazing piece of information about these kelp forests that are off the coast here in Massachusetts and Maine, and in these locations where many of you watching are from. The kelp forests create ecosystems of rich biodiversity, and there is a resource focusing on zooplankton as one of the foundational organisms of the food chain. So I'm going to share a little bit about both of those with you. Next slide, please. So the first is about the actual resource related to the kelp forest ecosystem, being able to examine this system and also the potential threats. So in this resource and the video clip that is associated with it, students will learn a little bit more about these kelp forests and also learn about an invasive species that is interacting with the kelp in these regions called red turf algae. And this is a great way for you to be able to sort of use different examples of invasive species and then guide your students in searching and learning about whether there are invasive species in your local area or identifying other invasive species. So it's a new tool for you to use with this topic that you may have never heard of before, and may be able to explore something that could be potentially more local to you, or it's an example that you give that then you move towards the local invasive species in your area. You can also use this as a way to start to identify and question how biotic and abiotic factors are impacting systems like the kelp forests. And it is also an opportunity for you to talk more with your students. I know I saw some environmental science teachers, some APES teachers, talking about long-term research projects and how we actually study these ecosystems. I mentioned this, and I have this small little map on here because it is the locations of the National Science Foundation's long-term ecological research stations. And you can see that they are kind of scattered across the United States. In Alaska, there's one in Antarctica and one way out in the middle of the Pacific. And these are also areas where you can gather data, you can learn more about research that's taking place there, and they are, as the name implies, long-term research. This is talked about in the video that goes along with this resource, and so it's a great way to identify ways in which research is happening, not just in these kelp forests, but in other locations that may be closer to you. Next slide, please. There is also a resource related to zooplankton in the marine food web, and you will learn a little bit about copepods, which are a small zooplankton rich in lipids. And so one of the ways, if you are learning about macromolecules or studying lipids, you can actually use this as an example of a rich source of lipids that can actually help other organisms with long-term energy storage. So you can introduce food web ideas with this resource, which you will see in the descriptions and the questions that are associated with it. But then you can also do some extensions and some discussions related to it. You can also have students research other organisms that rely on zooplankton. In this particular resource and video, you will learn about North Atlantic right whales and their reliance on copepods and how shifts in temperature are actually affecting their movements. But there are ways to talk about many other organisms and create more of a system view by using this discussion of zooplankton in this area. All right, next slide, please.
And then we also have a couple of resources on how to respond to these changes that are happening in the Gulf, and things about how to build resilience and in a sustainable way. There's a resource on the co-cultivation of mussels and kelp, which establish a mutually beneficial relationship to enhance their growth and build and have more success for both of the organisms growing there. In addition, there's a resource that uses ocean crops to help mitigate a climate change factor. So just different ways of using the ocean to build some kinds of sustainable solutions to climate change. Next slide, please.
So one of the ways that you can use this resource from a biological or a life science standpoint is to use it as a case study for ecological relationships, this relationship between the kelp and the mussels. And the resource will guide students in modeling this relationship, including the interactions of carbon between the two organisms. It's also a great jumping point where you can include other cultures and other practices that include this type of intercropping or growing crops together in agriculture. And one of those ways would be indigenous American agriculture, growing 3 different crops together, known as the 3 sisters, which are corn or maize, beans, and squash. And so you can incorporate indigenous knowledge that you can also pull into your classroom in order to expand cultural understandings that might be happening in ecosystems. This will also, as I said before, draw in the carbon cycle and allow students to do some modeling with the carbon cycle and identify ways in which you can look at cause and effect. So the before this dual agricultural process was started, and then after, and really give them an opportunity to model those changes that they may see. Next slide.
And when you think about ocean acidification and this kind of mutually beneficial relationship between kelp and mussels, chemistry isn't maybe the first thing that would come to mind, but it is actually rich as far as the kinds of ideas that you can connect to this phenomenon. One, just the ocean acidification. If you're introducing the pH scale, students have a lot of trouble with thinking in terms of that log scale. And so when they're looking at the over time of the changes in ocean acidification, They don't look that big, but when we're thinking about it on the log scale, and they're much more significant. And so it gives them something to hold on to kind of see and kind of understand what that scale means. For like high school chemistry, when you're getting into chemical equilibrium, reaction rates, and Le Chatelier's principle, this is a real life example of how the different chemical reactions actually change as the conditions change and the ocean becomes the pH decreases. I'm not going to go through all of these equations, but it just gives an example of just the shift in equilibrium from going all the way up to carbonate to having the reverse reaction going back to the bicarbonate really significantly affects both the health and the survival of shellfish and crustaceans in the Gulf. So next slide, please.
So the last resource is one of my favorites because this is about how emissions from cows and their methane production are able to be reduced with the help of kelp. So again, there were a number of questions that we got prior to the webinar having to do with, how do we talk to students about climate change or these emissions and what they're doing to our environment? But there are promising ways in which we can try to see reduction in that, and that scientists are working towards, that farmers are working towards. And I can totally see this being a phenomenon question at the beginning of, how do cow burps affect our ecosystem or affect our world? And students might not think about cow burps, which is a form of methane production, but you can still then tie it into sort of this nutrient cycling and greenhouse gases. And it brings in this really fun concept of cow burps and methane production and how it actually affects us. You can bring in some math connections. This resource and the video with it incorporates some math. You learn about the amount of methane that might be produced by a single cow. And so you can actually do some local calculations if you are living near a cow farm, and you can maybe talk to that farmer about how many cows do you have and do some calculations with your students to actually find out in your area what amounts of methane are being produced by that particular farm. And then I think Sean has just some ideas talking about how your students can be involved in using kelp as well.
Oh, right. Yeah. So this is just one way you can connect the ocean and products from the ocean, in this case, kelp, which is a carbon sink, and products made from kelp to is something that, a small thing that you can do even when you're inland. And in this case, also mitigate some atmospheric carbon as well. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so we've worked through our sea change collection, and you'll get links to that tomorrow, and along with all the resources that we've talked about and many more. We just wanted to give you a quick sneak peek of a new collection. Next slide, please. And you can start the video too, please. This is the NOVA resource collection on PBS LearningMedia. It contains almost 1,000 resources from NOVA films and media over the years. This right here is the new version that will be available to everybody next month. It is reorganized and has some new functionalities that will help make finding resources easier for you. You can search within the collection, and it's organized in a couple different ways. And here you can see it's organized by subject. And then beneath each subject, there are some topics that align with the NGSS standards. So under physical science, there's matter and interactions, force and motion, waves, and energy is the fourth one. And then also we've pulled out Nova Labs, which are very popular, very rich, interactive learning resources that really allow kids to dig into. Some of them are data, some of them use a lot of media, some are projects, but they can really learn about deeply about several phenomena. Then we have these resources organized by broadcast film. So if there's ever, you're thinking about your curriculum and thinking, oh man, I remember watching that Weathering the Future. I wish I had something from there. That would be great for my my class. So you'll be able to find resources that way as well. And so that will be available in January. Next slide, please. This is just a reminder that everything that we showed you, except for that one source of data, is available for free on PBS LearningMedia. Next, please. And you can assign all these resources through our system or Google Classroom or many other systems. So please come check it out and poke around after the webinar.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone, and thank you again. Bye.